Welcome everyone to the 12th meeting in 2016 of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee. Everyone present is please reminded to switch off their mobile phones. Apologies have been received from Gail Ross, the Deputy Convener. There are no other apologies. The first item today is to seek the agreement of the committee to consider the evidence it has heard on the forthcoming draft budget 2017-18 at agenda item 5 in private. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. At agenda item 2, the committee is going to take evidence on the Scottish Government's forthcoming draft budget 2017-18. Today we're focusing on broadband, and I would like to welcome Stuart McKinnon, Senior Public Affairs Advisor to the Federation of Small Businesses, Stuart Robertson, Director of Digital Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Zoe Laird, Community Broadband Scotland, Director, Community Broadband Scotland, Glenn Preston, Director of Ofcom Scotland, and Professor Michael Foreman of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I would like to welcome you all to the meeting, and can I ask each of you if you'd very briefly give an outline of the respective organisations that you represent. And Stuart, if we could start with you, we'll work directly along the table.
No problem. My name's Stuart McKinnon. I work for the Federation of Small Businesses Scotland. The FSB is a business membership organisation with approximately 18,000 members in Scotland and about 170,000 members across the UK. We campaign for a business environment that helps small businesses thrive.
Thank you. Stuart.
Good morning. I'm Stuart Robertson, representing Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We're obviously an economic development and community development agency for the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and we've been very closely involved in all things digital, including the rollout of superfast broadband to date.
Sorry.
I'm Zoe Laird. I'm the Director of Community Broadband Scotland, which is under the governance of Highlands and Islands Enterprise and operates across the whole of Scotland to work with communities to develop solutions to broadband infrastructure.
Glenn.
Good morning, Glenn Preston. I'm the Scotland Director for Ofcom. We are the communications sector regulator, focusing specifically on fixed and mobile telecoms, on broadband and broadcasting, as well as some post issues. I should add that we are about to assume regulatory responsibilities of the BBC from April of next year, as you know, but fortunately that's not the topic of conversation today.
Michael.
I'm Michael Foreman. I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I chaired a Digital Scotland committee that produced 2 reports, one in 2010, one in 2015. I'm also a professor at the University of Edinburgh with a continued interest in these matters.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind witnesses, we are particularly looking at the financial aspects of the rollout programme. But the questions that you will receive this morning are quite wide-ranging, which will help inform us. But if you can always remember, if there's an opportunity to illustrate it with costs to inform our decisions, that would be extremely helpful. The first question is from Stuart.
Thank you very much, Convener. And it's a question that I expect all may wish to contribute to. On the 3rd of November, the Scottish Government launched a consultation, a digital strategy for Scotland 2017 and beyond. Now, it may well be, of course, that responses will be coming from a number of people on the panel, but it would be helpful if we had an indication of the sort of things that perhaps the FSB and the Royal Society in particular might wish to see reflected in the strategy, and perhaps Ofcom as well.
So, Stuart, would you like to lead on that?
Yes, absolutely. So, FSB is still formulating a response to the new digital strategy. Broadly, we're going to say that some good progress has been made, but we're far from being a world-leading digital nation. We need a programme of works across multiple fronts to try and close the gap between Scotland and other leading digital nations. I would say, obviously, infrastructure. We're pleased with the Scottish Government commitment to universal superfast broadband. We need to see progress across mobile as well. We need extra effort to boost skills and also to deliver extensive business support. We're also looking for progress across digital government as well, where I think that Scotland lags other parts of the UK.
Okay, Professor, do you want to add to that?
Briefly, yes. Firstly, I think more ambitious targets, more investment and more open access, particularly where there's natural monopoly, as is the case in much of rural Scotland. On the skills issue, we feel, I think this is a common feeling amongst much of the fellowship, that digital needs to be embedded in the curriculum throughout all stages of learning alongside literacy and numeracy. And on exclusion, work I've done recently looking at Ofcom data, for which I'm very grateful, shows that although we're making huge progress in connectivity, those who remain offline are increasingly deprived with respect to those who are online, and that's actually serving to put them in a place where it's very hard for them to get out of the situation they're in because they don't have the digital benefits, and they can't even get the digital benefits because of the situation they're in, so you get a cycle of deprivation.
Stuart, do you want to comment from a Highlands and Islands perspective?
Just really to say that we are responding to particularly well, connectivity. We're involved in discussions about what comes next. On the economy, skills, participation and security, we have already given some informal feedback to the Scottish Government. So we think these themes are the correct themes, and we will certainly be involved in all parts of the formation of the strategy.
Okay. So rural areas were mentioned. I'm sure you'll have a view there.
Yeah, well, obviously connectivity is such a key part. From my point of view, the more people using broadband, the better economic and social impacts we have, just as Michael mentioned. So it would be to look at a focus on that, but obviously connectivity has to come to enable some of that to happen.
Glenn, do you want to add something on that?
If I may, please. I think we're making a decision just now about whether we want to feed in formally to the consultation, and different parts of Ofcom are considering the key aspects, the key themes that have been identified in the new digital strategy. Probably the critical issue for us is the question of the relationship between the UK Government's proposal for a broadband USO and the Scottish Government's own commitment to 100% superfast by 2021. The committee is probably aware that we are already providing technical advice to the UK Government by the end of the year on the range of options that are available to them to deliver their commitment to the broadband USO. The question for us is how that might overlap with the Scottish Government's own plans for 100% superfast. We are encouraging dialogue between both of the administrations to understand how they want to achieve these things, what their timelines and implementation plans are, and what technical advice Ofcom as a regulator can offer to both administrations to allow them to achieve their objectives.
Stuart.
Obviously, we're thinking of budgets here, so I want to go on and talk about what funding might be required. But just as part of answering that, and on the back of what's come up, perhaps particularly from Ofcom, where we were hearing their involvement with the two governments. And I just wondered if Ofcom had yet got a view on the prospects that 5G might have for delivering superfast broadband speeds to areas that might otherwise be very expensive or difficult to reach, and in particular whether consideration is being given to what has happened in Germany, where the new technologies are focused on filling the areas that have currently 0G, in other words, no coverage, preferentially before upgrading the services of the already digitally rich areas in the centre of our cities. And just to complete this round for Professor, I just wanted to briefly, a reference was made in your opening remarks to open access, and I just wanted greater clarity as to what you meant when you said that. I was a little uncertain about that.
Okay, I think just because there's some quite meaty bits in there, and perhaps if we could get the, I could ask Glenn just to comment on the 5G point that Stuart's raised, and then the Professor, and then I'm going to come to each of you and ask you on the funding and where you think we need to be as far as funding to achieve the government's ambitions. So, Glenn, could you start, please?
Yes, absolutely. And I am happy to respond on the funding point as well, because it is a feature of the conversation.
The chance, if you
Thank
could
you.
do with the 5G first, that
Yeah,
would be perfect.
absolutely. So, I mean, the short answer to Mr. Stevenson's question is we don't yet know what 5G is going to mean in terms of the availability of superfast, but it is absolutely one of the things that we're going to be consulting on and considering over the course of the next few months. We are talking about, I think, years, frankly, before there are clear solutions as to the provision of 5B's links with superfast. But we are confident that it should provide that, and our expectation is that it should provide that type of basis for the provision of superfast, so improved latency and bandwidths and so on. We will consult openly on this over the course of the next probably 12 to 18 months, and I'm looking to engage with both the Scottish Government, UK Government and this committee on how this can deliver the sort of objectives that both of the administrations want.
Briefly ask if you're also engaged in the issue of early delivery to areas without coverage.
Yes, so when we consult, I think one of the things we will do is look at that German model that you mentioned, the kind of inside-out rural model where that obligation was placed on the providers to consider making the provision in rural areas come first before they go to those urban areas. So that is absolutely one of the options that we'll be looking to get views on.
So no G will go straight from no G to 5G. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I don't think we're suggesting that at all. But we do think that 5G potentially offers us a significant step towards the superfast speeds that both governments are looking for.
Before we leave 5G, I think Jamie's got a question on that for you, Glenn.
Just very brief on that. Is this going to come about via an auction of spectrum? In other words, is Ofcom holding excuse me, still recovering, a spectrum of the frequencies required to deliver 5G, and if so, how far down that process of the parameters of the auction in terms of bids, who can bid for it, how much they can bid for, etc.
So, yeah, the short answer to the question is yes. This will feature as part of the spectrum auctions that Ofcom will bring forward over the course of the next few months and couple of years. We did bring forward a consultation on 2.3 gigahertz last week, and we've been quite clear about those people who are entitled to bid for certain elements of that spectrum. The process of clearance of 700 megahertz, which is one of those areas where we think there is the kind of most scope to get deeper into buildings, for example, is some time away still, and we'll be looking to consult on that probably in the next 12 to 18 months or so.
Professor, I think there was Stuart had asked you a specific question on openness,
I think
open access.
yes, the way I would respond to that is to say we've made tremendous progress in the Highlands and Islands with the fibre that's been put in that actually changes the game for Western Scotland. But those publicly funded assets aren't being managed, in my opinion and plenty of colleagues' opinions, to encourage competition and maximise the benefits. And I think that that's largely a regulatory issue in the UK because the commercial well, those now belong to BT, so they're publicly funded, they belong to BT, and there's no way that BT, as a commercial decision, would decide to open them up to competition in a way that might maximise those benefits.
Very, very briefly, you're suggesting that we should get to a position where the signals on the fibre can be created and managed by other than simply Openreach. In other words, there should be multiple carriers directly interfacing with the cable.
In many community projects, they found that despite the fact that there is now fibre nearby, they can't access that fibre cost effectively, and I think that's slowing down progress.
Thank you.
Okay, now finances and how much it's going to cost us, Stuart.
The FSP accepts that progress has been made to improve Scotland's broadband capabilities, but it's difficult to tally that with the experience we get back from our members on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. I'm sure, like MSP's mailbags, we regularly get contact from from businesses who are dissatisfied with their connectivity. We're looking for sustained funding to improve Scotland's connectivity on a UK-wide basis. FSB's been pushing for improved local infrastructure, specifically roads, broadband and mobile. We've suggested that any monies coming to Scotland from the autumn statement could be deployed to improve local infrastructure and specifically digital infrastructure. One of the interesting elements of the autumn statement was a new proposed rate relief for digital infrastructure. There's a precedent for that in Scotland with the rate relief on mobile masts. Could that be deployed in Scotland? Without the resources of government at my disposal, I can't say how much bringing Scotland up to speed would cost. But we can look at the current £400 million programme to improve digital infrastructure and broadband infrastructure in Scotland, and we can maybe compare that to the cost of the new Forth Bridge at 1.4 billion, and we can say, while the new bridge is important, we need to see digital infrastructure in the same light as we do physical infrastructure.
So, sorry, just so I can understand that. You're saying the 400 million, are you saying that's not enough? Are you saying...
if we're going to achieve 100% coverage, I think it's well recognised that that's not enough money.
Just check, of course, the 400 million is merely the government investment.
Yes.
There are commercially viable areas.
I think the 400
that are also receiving investment directly from commercial providers.
You're from my information suggests that the 400 million is a combination of Scottish Government, UK Government, European money and local government money, plus a little bit of investment from BT.
No, I'm just checking. I just choose this as a random example.
Sure.
The area around Turriff is not included in the area that's supported by government.
Yes.
Because it's expected that it will be commercially viable, and therefore the investment to make it accessible is coming solely from BT Openreach, who own. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, I don't know what the number for that is, so I'm merely suggesting that it may be a bigger number. I don't know what it is.
Sure. To clarify, I would say that there will be additional investment needed for interventions in the marketplace in places that the market won't service.
Stuart, I feel confident you're going to have a figure to hand.
Well, I'll certainly try and come up with a figure. I think the first thing we have to remember is that what we've done today is try and address a market failure where the private sector has gone so far, and then we're putting public money in to go further. And I'm certainly going on the basis that as we get to 100%, that will be almost like a market failure on top of a market failure. So it will be a very high proportion of that will be public intervention. And the public intervention to date is quite different from the rest of Scotland and Highlands and Islands. The public intervention in the Highlands and Islands is has been around 95% public intervention. And I can only think that that kind of level of intervention will continue. So the 410 million that's been earmarked to date does indeed include contribution from the winning bidder. What I suppose I'm saying is, going forwards, I can't see that there will be a large contribution from the private sector. I think we need to rely on a very large proportion of that being public money. Highlands and Islands Enterprise has not done any analysis or got any analysis of the budget this time round, because we're not in the lead as last time, but for our own region. Last time, though, we got independent consultants to look at it, and the estimate was to get to the then target, which was 90% coverage in the Highlands and Islands, it would take between 200 and 300 million to reach that level. As members will know, we have a budget of 146 million, and we're getting to around about, by the end of next year, around about 86% coverage. So I think going forwards, I think it's probably reasonable to think that we may well still need 200 to 300 million, given that we are now going to seeking to get to 100% as opposed to 90%, and that we need to get everybody to, unlike the target last time, to connect people to the infrastructure, the target this time is actually super fast speeds for everyone. So I think I won't make any guesses about what the rest of Scotland would take, but I would point out that back in 2004, when we were investing in ADSL first generation broadband, that at the end of the day, the public intervention for the Highlands and Islands was on par with the public intervention for the rest of Scotland. So it's, in a way, it would appear that it's the landmass you've got to cover that's going to indicate the cost, rather than necessarily the number of premises or people that you have to cover.
And sorry, just so I understand, that is including the most expensive last 2 or 3% that you think will be difficult on fibre, or is that using other means as well?
I think we certainly believe that we have to recognise that there may be a number of different solutions to get to the 100%. I think that if we were trying to get fibre to everybody, we would have a much greater cost.
Zoe, you've experienced that.
Yeah, I think Stuart's right to aim for possibly the ultimate solution of full fibre is considerably expensive, but probably should be considered over a longer term than our 2020 target. And I think it would be possible to get an estimate of what that might cost from some of the officials who've been doing some modelling work. I think there's also experience from other countries to draw from. And from what I've seen, other countries have tended to spend more to achieve more than we have in Scotland historically. So I think there's a few possibilities for getting a ballpark figure for the ultimate goal. But one of the points I wanted to raise was in relation to something that Michael Foreman mentioned earlier, when we're working with communities right at the edge of connectivity, the wholesale backhaul costs can be prohibitive. And what that does tend to mean is that small projects find it very difficult in terms of economies of scale to cover their annual costs. So what I would refer to as operating expenditure on an annual basis can be extremely challenging as we go ahead. And we may need to find ways to support that going ahead in the future. I think ultimately that should be negated by a much longer rollout of fibre and improved backhaul across the country. But there's a stepping stone before we get to that point. So it doesn't necessarily answer your question with a number, but it gives you some clues.
It gives us an indication it's an ongoing problem once connections made. Glenn, sorry.
Yeah, so from an Ofcom perspective, I think we would recognise the points that both Zoe and Stuart have made. Our approach is, I guess, slightly different in the sense that we've been tasked with providing technical advice to the UK government on their broadband USO proposals, and that includes a strand of work looking at costs and technologies. And I think we recognise that for some of those remote and rural areas, as Zoe said, and Stuart said, that kind of mix of technologies will be essential to deliver the objectives that the governments are seeking. In terms of the work that we're doing on the broadband USO, we consulted on it in the summer and we ended up with a couple of distinct visions of how to achieve the objectives of a broadband USO. So there was what we would describe as the kind of safety net, giving access to key online services, which is the kind of 10 megabit that the UK government's talking about, and then a service similar to that provided in commercially competitive areas. So you can see where they kind of feature on the spectrum, where you'd have a minimum download speed, maybe up to 30 megabit, which is I think what the Scottish Government has committed to as well. And our job over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks is to look at all the data that we gathered during the consultation and to finalise that in advice to the UK government on what those costs and technologies might look like. So we haven't got a final figure yet, and that's for the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm not clear yet if it's going to be disaggregated for different bits of the United Kingdom, but can check that and certainly come back to the committee. But we have also committed to having a conversation with the Scottish Government about how we can support with our own technical advice and consideration, their own commitment to do superfast by 2021.
We've constantly heard the use of download speeds. we're also looking at improving upload speeds to speeds similar to the download speeds?
Yeah.
Right,
That will, I mean, that's the sort of thing that will absolutely feature in the consideration.
Because
that
for
we have to
many
give,
rural industries in design and so on, upload is very important as well
Yeah.
as download. Thank you.
So just to be clear, when do you think that piece of work will be finished? Because you offered it to come back to the committee and let us know that.
Yeah, so the end of the calendar year is the deadline that we have from the UK government. So I think it will be in the kind of last week before Christmas is when we expect to share that with them.
So when would you be in a position to share that with others?
We'll try and do that as quickly as we possibly can, and I'll make a commitment to the committee today to come back to you and give you a kind of specific date to share what we can.
That would be perfect. Thank you. Michael, do you want to?
Yes, if I may. I'm not a financial expert, but I can look around the world. So, like Zoe, I think looking at other places is worthwhile. So our targets are set at 24 or 30 megabits a second, and that's called next generation. There's a recognized problem of long lines, but it's not quantified very well. So when we give our targets for coverage, it's not always clear whether we're including the long lines where you won't get those speeds or not. We're a small country, 18% your rural population. Let's compare us with, and we've spent about $500 million so far. So France, 8 times the area, 10 times the population, has recently committed 20 billion euros. This is of government money, is my understanding. They have 24% rural population, 8 times the area, 10 times the population. So we're under-investing compared with France, and their target is 100% to 100 megabits per second for 2022. Maybe France is too big, so think of Estonia. Estonia, 31% of the population is rural. They're half the area we have, and only a quarter of the population we have, but their target is 98% within 1.5 kilometers of fiber access. And as long as we do the kind of technologies we're using at the moment, you will not have download speeds and upload speeds matching each other, because the technology for the last connectivity is that you share the upload effectively between a number of people, even though you're getting better on the download. So there really are problems with the whole strategy, and my feeling is that you should up both the funding and the targets in order to compete with the rest of the world. And those are just 2 examples. You can find many more.
Okay, I think the next question is coming from Mike.
Parts. Fergus Ewing, our Cabinet Secretary, whose responsibility is this, has reaffirmed this month that on the 3rd of November, he said that 95% of households should be connected to superfast broadband by the end of next year. That's just 13 months from today, 13 months' time. So my question really is, firstly, do you think that target is going to be achieved in 13 months' time? And secondly, since we're focusing on the budget and we're looking at the budget that's about to be presented to us, do you think there's enough money in, that is Scottish Government money, in the programmes to ensure that we hit that target? So really, is it going to be a hit? If we don't think it's going to be a hit, is it primarily funding, or is there something else? And have we got enough money in the budget?
Difficult question. Who would like to go first on that? You're all looking the other way. Stuart Robertson.
I think that the 95% target, given that it's based on connecting premises to the upgraded infrastructure, is doable by 2017. We're already seeing that, as members will know, the Highlands and Islands project is running slightly ahead of the rest of Scotland, in that we were due to complete the first phase by the end of this calendar year, but we're seeing additional rollout going to happen through next year. So we're going to go further than the 84% that we originally thought. And that may well be the case, well, it's already the case in the rest of Scotland, that they have gain share or clawback money to enable to go further. So I think on the basis that the target was set, which was the percentage of premises connected to the new infrastructure, not premises at 24 meg or above, I think that target is doable. And I think there is enough money currently. I think the challenge is to go beyond the 95%. Well, two things. One is to bring everybody within the 95% up to superfast speeds, and then go beyond the 95% to get superfast speeds to the last 5%.
I noticed a wry smile from Michael. I wonder if you'd like to come back at that stage.
It's merely this connected to superfast. Frankly, the moment you're connected to the internet, you're connected to superfast somewhere. Being connected to superfast really doesn't do you any good if you're just getting super slow speeds. So it's a target that I think shouldn't be publicized because it sets expectations, because people naturally think, I'm connected to superfast, I should get superfast speeds. I think the Advertising Standards Authority should get in here. Not, this just doesn't tell the truth to the public.
I give everyone else, Stuart, do you want to come?
It's a tiny semantic point, but there is something important behind it. I heard Stuart Robertson say 95% people connected to superfast broadband. Is it not the case it's 95% of people connectable? Because being connected requires you to sign up and pay money.
Yes.
I just wanted to be clear.
You are that is correct. It's 95% of premises on a network, and should they choose to sign up, they can. And I was really just trying to make the point that the targets that we're working to are targets set some years back. I think the world has moved on, and I think BDUK, for example, is now very much looking at the number of premises, percentage of premises connected at 24 megabits or below. And I think that's, we've always seen that is really the objective. So I was maybe being myself a little bit pedantic in answering the earlier question. So I was working on the targets that were set previously, but I think everybody's aspiration is now to get people able to, should they choose, to be connected to a true superfast service.
Stuart, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Michael Furman's absolutely right when he talks about the user experience. If it doesn't matter whether you're notionally got super fast speeds, if your experience is terrible, then you're going to end up grumpy. FSB, we made representations to Ofcom and others that network providers shouldn't be allowed to advertise super fast speeds, up to 10 megabits per second. Doesn't mean anything at all if you're actually getting a very poor experience, and we were pleased to see Ofcom move on that. On Mike's point, I don't think I would want to second guess Audit Scotland, who said that they're on track to meet the targets. One point that I would make is that available connections to small and medium-sized businesses lag behind the general population, specifically because there's such a high proportion of small businesses in rural areas and in business parks, which are often poorly served by the current intervention. So if we're going to develop a new programme of interventions, it would be great to see the business community especially targeted, because that's where we think we'll get the most bang for our buck.
Glenn, I'm going to bring you in here to be the adjudicator on what it actually means.
Well, I think we, in Ofcom, we recognise the point that Michael Foreman and Stuart McKinnon just made about the up to point, the kind of actual lived experience of residential and business customers. We have developed with industry voluntary broadband speeds code of conduct, and particularly focused on kind of business services, with all of the main communications providers being signatories to it, and that requires them, once they're signed up, to provide transparent information at the point of sale, so at that kind of contractual point that you, I think, rightly made, and to manage any speed-related problems, and to allow, importantly, to allow customers to exit when their speeds fall below a minimum threshold. But we recognise it's a voluntary, it is a voluntary code, and although it would seem that the communications providers are sticking to it, it's a first step for us, and I think it's the thing that we need to think about what next, to make sure that people are actually getting the speeds that they think they're signing up to.
Would you like to add anything, or are you?
No, I'm very happy that everybody's answered your questions.
I think Jamie's got an additional question on that.
Digital questions, can you hear a bit? Thank you. I'll try and keep them brief and short. But on the the point that Glenn Preston made there on, and this is about regulation of how people sell these products. It's all very well having a termination right if you're not getting the speeds that you first thought you might get, but the problem for people who are at those speeds is that they probably don't have any choice or any other service providers to go to. So if you're in an area where you thought you might get a couple of meg and you're only getting 1.5 or 2, it's all very well terminating your contract, but then you're left with no internet at all. And I wondered if what Ofcom is, a voluntary code is a nice idea, but how far should you recommend that our governments could go to actually make sure that people get the speeds that they were promised when they signed the contracts, and that if by that they cannot be just held to sort of ransom in the sense that, well, you can cancel your contract if you're not happy, Mr. Customer, but that's not good enough for people if they've got nowhere else to turn to.
I mean, I think it's an interesting question and one that all of us will have had in our mailbags, but it's wandering a wee bit away from the budget side of it. So
Perhaps,
could I ask you to...
I think given the context of the...
Could I ask you to give a succinct answer to that, please?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we absolutely recognise the point you made. I mean, one of the provisions of the UK Digital Economy Bill that's currently before the Westminster Parliament will allow us to take enforcement action and remedy the consequences of a breach of the new universal service obligation. And we will be able to fine communications providers up to 10% of their turnover. And that is a significant new power that we haven't had previously, and I think should go some way to allowing the type of remedy that you kind of describe. But we do recognise the point that you make, that if you had to have no alternative provider, you know, what next for you? And I think that's the kind of broader question that we're all trying to address.
Okay, is there any more questions on that particular line, or Johnny?
Convener, morning panel. I think the questions I was going to ask have largely been addressed already, but if I maybe just flesh out a couple of things, please. And one of them was whether this much quoted sum of 412 million, do the panel consider that's been well spent thus far?
Professor, I'm going to let you go first on that.
From a technical point of view, I think yes. In terms of the way that those assets are now in private hands and there it seems to be very little control over how they're used, I think no.
Okay. Stuart Robertson, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, obviously, I think that it certainly in the Highlands and Islands it has been well spent. And I think that while I think it's true largely what Professor Foreman says, that the ability of, for example, of community projects to get affordable connections from the infrastructure is still an issue. The access is to an extent open, and the new ducts that have been put in, for example, are open to other users under the normal regime that Ofcom has agreed with BT. So it's not that there is no access to this publicly funded infrastructure. I think maybe what the Professor is saying is the access is still not affordable enough or easy enough to be usable.
Okay, so do you want to comment on that?
My experience of it to date is that the money has been well spent to meet the objective that it had been set at the time, which was to connect as many people as possible for the smallest amount of money, which was a very sensible objective. I think things have changed, demand has changed, expectations have changed, and technology's marching on as well. I think I probably feel that, to disagree with Michael, that the fact that the network is in private hands is potentially a good thing because of the pace of change and the ability to create competition. But having said that, there's very little competition for the rural areas of Scotland, and that's the challenge that we are continually faced with, is how to stimulate that competition. And even if it was competition between internet service providers through wholesale open access ducts that are owned by Openreach, that would be much better than the position that we're in now. And it would go some way to answering Jamie Green's point about having competition for internet service providers in areas that are very remote and rural. I'm one of those people who tried to move away from my provider, and 3 months later finally got reconnected back to the same one because there was no choice, despite advertising. So I have a great deal of sympathy with that. And I think that competition in internet service provision over technology that's already in place would be a really strong strand to be developing.
Stuart McKinnon, do you want to say anything on that?
You know, I would again reflect on the Audit Scotland report, suggesting that the contracts are delivering what was asked of them. I would agree with Zoe, though, that demand and expectations are changing amongst both consumers and businesses. And also, if we were going to really reap the rewards from the investment that's been made, we need to build upon the infrastructure. You know, we need to develop Scotland's digital skills and digital businesses as well, if we're going to reap true value from that investment.
Glenn.
So the direct answer to Mr Finney's question is that Ofcom doesn't do the kind of consideration of value of money for the broadband rollout in Scotland, but we have no reason to second guess the Audit Scotland report that Stuart McKinnon just mentioned. I mean, our focus has been on the point that's been made by the other panel members about increasing competition with BT so as to incentivise that investment in the system, recognising how challenging that can be in rural Scotland, as well as trying to support the thinking of governments on the public investment in those kind of commercially unviable areas. We did a digital communications review last year, which will feature as part of our strategy over the course of the next couple of years as well, around opening up BT's infrastructure, which has already been mentioned, the kind of ducts and poles stuff. And it probably hasn't escaped anybody's notice that yesterday we announced we were going to proceed with the formal notification to require the legal separation of Openreach from BT after we felt that BT had failed to offer voluntary proposals that address the competition concerns that we have. There is lots and lots of information on that available to the committee on the Ofcom website, which we published yesterday.
For that response, certainly it's the case that a large private multinational corporation has done very well from public money. Can I ask, and that may be, of course, entirely to do with the contract. I'm not suggesting the contract terms haven't been met, but maybe the wrong contract was drawn if public benefit should be the outcome of public expenditure, not private profit. Can I ask why there is a cap, please, of £1,700 and how much BT can spend in each premises? That just may be a legal...
Stuart, yes, and sorry, I'm just going to sort of point out that all the committee members have got questions they want to ask, and there's quite a lot of them. I'm conscious of time, so if people would like to give us a succinct answer as they could, then I'll give everyone the opportunity to come in without reducing the quality of your answer, because that's a good question. Sorry, Stuart.
The £1,700 was something agreed by BD UK at an earlier point to try and speed up the rollout of the BD UK contracts across the UK. And certainly our understanding is that it's not a cap, it's a requirement that if it's going to cost more than £1,700 per premise in a certain bit of rollout, that BT are obliged to let the authority, in our case Highlands and Islands Enterprise, know that it's going to cost more. And we can then make a decision of whether we see that as value for money. So there is no suggestion that we can only spend up to 1,700 on any premise. We can go above that if we believe it's value for money.
Are you able to say then, Mr Robertson, if I may, with an obvious supplementary to that, and how many instances has that occurred and what constitutes value for money?
Well, I don't have all the figures, but I do know that in certain instances we have gone over that amount as we get to the more challenging areas. We're certainly looking, what constitutes value for money, where we would certainly be looking to try and give us a fair coverage as possible over the various local authority areas, for example. So we may, in the Western Isles, where the coverage is lower, we perhaps agree to a higher than £1,700 per premise rollout than we might in Murray, for example.
And who adjudicates on that figure of what's, you know, that it's going to cost 1,900 or 2,000? Where does that figure? Is that BT that come up with that figure and then?
they tell us what it's looking like, and we obviously encourage them to go away and try and find a better, cheaper way to do it, but still the effective coverage. So yes, the cost information comes from BT.
Okay, thank you very much.
Rhoda's got a small supplementary.
It is. Zoe mentioned about internet service providers and no choice. I can understand that in community rollout, there is no choice because you are with the community provider. But if BT has reached your premise, what is stopping another service provider using that fibre, that link, so that you get a service from them? And I'm picking up that there's an issue there.
Maybe that Stuart Robertson's better placed to answer this than me, but my understanding is that that competition is open and ISPs can provide over that network. They may not choose to because they may not see enough customers in that particular area. I don't know, do you want to? Sorry.
In Zoe's case, I know that it's because her exchange is an exchange-activate exchange, which has a very limited number of potential ISPs. And I think this is a very valid point. As we go forwards and seek solutions for 100%, I think it's very important that we get solutions that are as close as possible to the wider market delivery, and that we don't end up with bespoke niche solutions for rural areas. We want as many people as possible to be part of the full market, the mass market, so that the service they get and the prices that they're offered and the range of choice that they get from ISPs is as close to urban areas as possible.
Glenn, do you want to come in on that? I see you nodding.
I mean, it would simply just to reaffirm, I think, that to reaffirm the 2 points. I think there can be both technical limitations and then market limitations. I think we have heard from other providers, you know, that they're not willing to go to those places at the moment because they aren't commercially viable. And I mean, this goes to you know, Ofcom's desire to open up the infrastructure, particularly on the ducts and poles side, and the comments I already made in relation to the legal separation of Openreach as well. That we're trying to drive that type of attractive market for the other providers.
Okay, I'm going to leave that there and move on to the next question, if I may, which actually comes from Rhoda as well. So,
which has been largely covered, to be honest, about the costs of rollout. And if I'm correct in that, what the estimate is to get to the government's 100% target, we're looking at 200 to 300 million for Highlands and Islands and double for Scotland. Is that correct? So we're talking about maybe 600 million to reach the 2021 target.
The point I made earlier was really just to say that looking to history, in the first generation broadband, it took as much public intervention in the Highlands and Islands as the rest of Scotland to get to the same point. So I don't really have any information about how much it might cost in the rest of Scotland. And as I said, I'm really basing my estimate on the Highlands and Islands figure on previous work done. We haven't done any analysis at this point because the reaching 100% is being led by the Scottish Government Digital Directorate and not HIE.
And how much of that funding would people have estimated would have come from Europe, and is Brexit going to affect the levels of funding available?
We didn't use any European funding in our previous project because the amount available to us at that time was of the total required was a relatively small amount, and so it's chosen not to use it. I can't make any estimate of what might be possible in going forwards about how much that be European funding. As far as I'm aware, the only European funding available currently to the Highlands and Islands for broadband purposes is around about £20 million from the structural funds.
Zoe, do you want to?
Yeah, just from a Community Broadband Scotland perspective, 9 million of the £16.5 million budget is from SRDP, so 4.5 million of that is directly from Europe, and the rest was matched by Scottish Government. But we don't believe it's at risk. There's been an agreement put in place that the funds don't need to be committed until we actually exit Europe, so we've got plenty of time to spend it, so it shouldn't be at risk.
No one's... Anyone else want to add? I mean, I'm happy to move on if ready, if you feel. Okay, the next question, Richard, I think is from you.
Okay. Professor Michael Foreman, you said, and I wrote it down, digital deprivation. So many of the areas that are in Scotland, Scotland's a lovely country, but it has a lot of geographic challenging areas to go to. So does any of the witnesses, can they provide any examples of pilot projects where we've been helped to boost mobile coverage in those geographic challenging areas? And if you know any pilot projects, are you aware of any funding, how the funding was raised? Or, I know of one project where I think it cost about £130,000 to go to a physically challenging area. Do you know of any other projects, maybe up in the Highlands Islands or in any areas in Scotland?
Maybe it would be appropriate, Richard, to start with Zoe on that, and then would that be all right, Zoe, please?
Yeah. Can I just clarify, are you asking about mobile connectivity as opposed to fixed broadband? Or
whatever, well, it could be, you know, at the end of the day, delivering, you know, one of you also said, delivering fibre to these physically challenging areas would cost.
Yeah.
So it could be Wi-Fi, it could be through satellite, it could be through whatever new technology is coming on.
I can talk about the Community Broadband Scotland projects, which there's 15 which are operational around remote and rural parts of Scotland, and they have typically used fixed wireless access. So this is what we would call fixed broadband, but delivered through wireless connectors. And the the average cost of those projects that are active just now has been about £500 a premise. I think we haven't estimated fibre costs. We've never received any quotes for fibre costs for those particular areas, but it would be significantly more than that, a multiple of many. So it gives you a flavour, but there's so many variations in the costings, depending on where the backhaule's coming from, and depending on how they connect to that, and depending on the detail of the geography that they're within, that can affect those costs both up and down.
Does anyone want to particularly pick up on the mobile aspect of it? Because I think that was part of Richard's question. The professor was wanting to come in. Michael, if you'd like.
Mobile aspect, but on the delivering through fixed wireless. So my colleague, Professor Peter Bunneman, has been very involved on the West Coast, and I've been marginally involved. And there's certainly successful projects there, which Zoe, of course, knows about. And one of the things that's happened recently is to set up an internet exchange there so that the different community networks can pool their backhaul, which is very creative and a good way to do things, I think. The other thing that's happened is Scottish Government has put some money into building some fibre, a community-built fibre. There were difficulties with that. I don't know very much of the detail, but there were difficulties in terms of connecting to the BT backhaul to get back to the internet exchange here in Edinburgh, which delayed things. I myself get my broadband here in Edinburgh using those technologies just so I understand what they do. So my signal comes to my house from Summerhall, about half a mile, and I get 50 megabits a second each way, and it's a community broadband project, and I pay £25 a month, and it's as good as I would get from a commercial provider. So I think that there's a lot of scope for doing these things in places where you can get backhaul. The communities can, at relatively low cost, produce these kinds of connectivity for small numbers of people. You can't do tens of thousands this way, but you can certainly do hundreds of people this way with fixed wireless and deliver very fast speeds. By UK standards, at least.
Okay. I'm immediately jealous when you talk about those levels of speed, along with everyone else on the committee in rural areas. 0.2 megabytes regulated means that I get no speed at all, really, most of the time. But Stuart, do you want to talk about phone masts?
Yeah, I would like to talk about mobile phones. It's a bit of a pet subject. You know, just as Scotland lags behind England on every measure of broadband connectivity, Scotland lags behind England on every level of mobile connectivity, including coverage to the premises, but especially geographic coverage. We were pleased to see the Scottish Government's mobile phone action plan, which has, I think, 4 proposed pilots where the Scottish Government's granting special rates relief, planning permissions and the like to boost coverage in especially poorly served areas. I'm aware of other pilot projects. I'm just not sure whether these pilot projects are, they're great, are they sufficient to close the gap on mobile coverage in Scotland, especially if we want to catch up with England. You know, one of the reports that the FSB recently published was looking at bank branch closures. The areas that are seeing bank branches closing are also the areas most poorly served by digital connectivity. How do we ensure that communities aren't left behind? While we've seen quite a lot of intervention into the broadband market, we've just not seen that same level of intervention in the mobile market, and it means that many areas are very, very poorly served in Scotland.
Len, do you want to come in on that?
Specifically on the mobile point. So there's 2 or 3 things that are probably worth sharing with the committee. So I mentioned earlier the kind of lower frequency spectrum availability for 4G services, which generally helps to just extend mobile coverage over longer distances and deeper into buildings. So we're, do it as part of our work, for example, on the upcoming 700 megahertz auction, which I mentioned in response to Mr. Green's question. We're looking at how that might be used to deliver those kind of longer range and deeper into buildings solutions. And we're also looking at whether we can consider that kind of inside-out model that we discussed with Mr. Stevenson as well. One of the other areas of interest which we haven't touched on yet is the Home Office's emergency services network procurement. We're quite keen to understand all the service conditions for that and how they will apply to different sites and whether there would be any constraints on their capacity to supply wider services. We think there might be scope there, but we're trying to get more information from both the UK government and have a discussion with the Scottish government about how that fits with their mobile action plan that Stuart McKinnon just mentioned as well. The final thing that's probably worth mentioning is we will do a new version of our annual Connected Nations report, which should be out sometime before Christmas. And we're changing the way that we do the metrics on that. So we're looking at geographic coverage, so landmass and indoor coverage, rather than some of the outdoor premises coverage that's happened before, which I think will give us a truer reflection on the challenge that faces us on mobile coverage.
Stuart McKinnon was talking about getting a signal. Many people over the years have been opposed to masts being erected. You know, you go out to work in the morning, you come back and there's a mast sitting outside. And I remember as a councillor, I actually actively got a company to move their mast about 300 yards over a railway and basically out, hid it away from people. We've also seen the innovative ways of, they've designed a mast like a tree, and like a flagpole. Do you think the public now accepts that they need coverage and they need their phone? Do you think people now accept that masts, can be? Is there any opposition now to masts being put up? Do you think also the fear of getting cancer from a mast is dissipated?
I wonder if we could direct that to start off with to Stuart Robertson, see if he's had any views from the Highlander, and then to the Professor, and then probably, if that's all right, leave it there. That if we get satisfactory answers. Stuart, would you?
I think there's a much greater acceptance that if we want the technologies, we have to have the infrastructure to go with it, and I think the fears about masts have receded. But I think it's still the case that many masts in the Highlands and Islands go to the local authority planning people, and there are discussions about the best siting for masts, and often that there may be requirements to move the site of them. But I think there is a much greater recognition that, as I said, that we need more masts if we want better coverage. And I think the other thing on mobile sector is to recognise it's in quite a different place from the fixed sector, in that the mobile operators are now spending a lot of their own money and rolling out coverage. So there will come a point, I'm sure, that there will need to be intervention with public funds, but we haven't reached that point yet. So it's not easy to put public money in now in the mobile sector, knowing that you're going to get value for money. But no doubt that point will come.
So do you have a view on masts and acceptability?
On acceptability, I was always concerned that schools found it difficult to put masts because schools are very well located with respect to the population. So they would be an ideal place to put masts, but that doesn't happen because of the concerns that you talked about, which I think are ill-founded. Just on masts and funding, the mobile infrastructure project hasn't been discussed, but when you talk about has money been well spent, that bit I think wasn't well spent because we didn't get any masts. But that's an aside.
I'm going to leave that as an aside, if I may, Professor. And Murray, you've got a question, I think, on challenges.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I mean, I'm sure you'll all be aware of the report that the Scottish Futures Trust published earlier this year, which obviously outlined some of the challenges that we're going to face. So it was really just to ask you what financial support you think will be needed to try and overcome some of the challenges that they identified.
Who'd like to lead on that? Glenn, it looks like you're up first.
Quite happy to have a first go. I mean, we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, I think, in that none of us appear to have a figure. Certainly from an Ofcom point of view, the technical advice that we will give to the UK government by the end of the year, will allow us to have a sense of what we think the different costs and technologies might be to deliver whatever the broadband USO ends up being. So we know there's the kind of safety net v future-proofing approaches, and we will share that analysis with the UK government, and then they will have to make a public policy choice about where they want that broadband USO to come out, and what type of public intervention will be necessary to achieve it across the UK, including in Scotland. What we don't have yet is just a number that says it's going to cost this much, either for the whole of the UK or separately for Scotland.
Does anyone want to? Stuart, yeah.
I'm afraid I don't have a number either, but I think that one of the most important things for rural Scotland is that whether we're talking fixed or mobile, what we require is the foundation stone. That's the greater amount of fibre further out into the more rural parts, so that the backbone infrastructure is there to allow the solutions to be built on top. And this is obviously particularly evident when it comes to perhaps island communities where they're served by microwave wireless at the moment, but actually need the higher capacity that a fibre brings. And if we could get that infrastructure in, and it may well be costly given the relatively small population of some of the islands, for example, I think we need to look at the investment not just about counting broadband connections. We need to think about delivery of public services. We need to think about the stemming depopulation. We need to think in the widest terms about the use of that investment. And it may well be a large amount of money, but it potentially could be money very well spent.
Mary, have you got a follow-up on that?
Yeah, well, it was just another question, really. I mean, that report also pointed out some of the particular issues. I mean, it talks about house builders and how they're reluctant to install fibre to the home in new housing developments. So, I mean, when it comes to issues like that, what other problems do you see that need to be addressed and need to be tackled?
Stuart McKinnon, I'm going to let you go on that one.
The SFT's report is the one looking at our ambitions for 2030. I think they would be much better placed to say how much all that's going to cost. I think in terms of costs, I think Stuart's absolutely right to point out, you know, what's the cost of not doing things? You know, from a small business point of view, HMRC are increasingly expecting you to, for instance, file your accounts online on a quarterly basis. If you do not have suitable internet access, what impact does that have on your business? While you know, we're looking for Scottish businesses to do much more of their interaction with the state at large online, but if you don't have good infrastructure, then that means that you're going to have more people using old-fashioned services, either face-to-face or telephone services, which will put greater pressure on the state and on costs. In relation to the specific points about housing estates, you know, I've heard similar complaints about business estates, so out-of-town business estates where the fibre hasn't been built as part of the default, and that may be the planning system. I understand that there has been recent changes to the planning system to try and address that particular issue, but I need to look into that.
Does anyone else want to add anything on that? Stuart and then Michael.
Just on the point about new housing estates and new business parks, I think that will, to find a way to make sure that these new developments are adequately covered with broadband is essential if we're going to meet the 100% commitment, because at some point in the near future, effectively we'll have an intervention area to go forward with a new procurement to put in place the further rollout. But that intervention area will not change through the contract, so that there will be continually new builds that will be outside the project. So it's essential that we don't come to the end of 2021 and then find that the new builds have been left outside the rollout. So I know that BT are doing more to ensure that they're going to put fibre into larger estates. And we also have to find a solution to make sure that new business parks are also adequately covered.
So I can understand that, sorry. Are you suggesting that all new housing projects over a certain size should have a planning requirement on it to provide fibre to the home?
I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm saying that we need to find a way of making sure that new developments get the full infrastructure, whether that's through planning, whether it's through buyers not buying, where the infrastructure's not there. You know, the power of the market. It's about developers maybe doing more to see the usefulness of having fibre connections. Perhaps it might make the houses more easy to sell. I'm just saying that we need to find some solution to make sure that going forwards, as we build new infrastructure, we put in broadband infrastructure at the same time.
Michael, I think you're going to have a view on this, I feel.
In our 2010 report, we identified fibre rating, which has been already mentioned this morning, and the lack of any planning requirements as an issue that was slowing things down. So we require sewage, we require water, we require electricity, we should require fibre. But there is a problem with requiring fibre because you can't just put a bit of fibre in, you have to connect it to somewhere. And so you need to interact with the local providers in order to get a connection back to the internet, and that can be difficult in rural places for reasons we've already discussed of a natural monopoly on those things. In towns, I think most new buildings actually do this, but in rural areas it's difficult because you only have one source of supply, and connecting to that may be very difficult, make it prohibitive, and the fibre rating may also be playing a role in inhibiting those developments.
Are you happy, Murray, with this?
I just think it would be interesting to find out, you know, if what dialogue has taken place, if any dialogue has taken place with developers and house builders to see how that might be progressed. But that can't be answered today.
I think that's something we can ask the Cabinet Secretary when he comes in, but I think it's a very relevant point that to make sure that the costs are identified now and people start building those in rather than relying on the government post-2021 to fill the gap. So I think that we'll make a note of that. Peter, you've got some questions on community broadband, and I'm going to look to Zoe to answer these in the main, unless anyone else wants to come in. So, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yes, Community Broadband Scotland, I want to dig a wee bit deeper into that. I mean, it's been very useful in the particularly hard-to-reach areas, and we understand that. And you're variously funded. Some of this funding comes from SRDP money, I believe. I just wondered, do any of the schemes funded by Community Broadband Scotland provide models of operation for other community-led projects, especially in remote areas? And also, how can value for money be ensured within these community broadband projects? You know, I'm interested to see that you identify that you are producing value for money.
Yes, I think you're quite right that there are good examples within the projects that we funded to date about how other communities could operate. And there's been some really strong projects that we've supported. Michael mentioned one earlier, which was what we refer to as the West Highland Access Network, which helps small communities get economies of scale through backhaul and sharing some of the services around that. That's a fantastic example that would be worth replicating. Again, it does rely on having connectivity in somewhere, and that comes with its own challenges. There are other projects, for example, Badenoch Broadband, which set out on its own, I think started off with leader funding, and we've funded a bit of an upgrade recently. That's a really nice growing business, actually, in the Speyside area. And they're extending their coverage to work with, they're hoping to attract up to 300 customers on that network. There's other examples. I mean, Mary Kirk's another one that's been winning awards for a similar kind of model. Again, developing into a small social enterprise, a small business enterprise, and again looking at customer base of 200 to 300 people, premises rather. And all of those are good examples of what's possible. They happen to have fairly strong and business-minded people involved in running those networks. And that can sometimes be a challenge for people that don't have some of those skills within their community. So that's something that we need to support more of. And I think in terms of value for money, they are great value for money insofar as they reach, as I mentioned earlier, those average cost of those projects in capital terms is about £500 a premise, which is great. But I think that we do need to look further ahead and think about how those projects could eventually upgrade potentially to more and more fibre. And are they bringing enough revenue in to do that? We've done some work on a study which is not complete yet to consider that, and it is looking actually quite positive that with the customers that they've attracted, they will be able to eventually do some upgrade work with the revenues raised and to pay staff to do that rather than act as volunteers. But as I say, these are quite exceptional and very strong projects. And it's also worth saying that those projects are charging in the region of £25 a month to £30 a month per customer. So again, not charging excessively. So the potential is there, but it is these projects have grown using volunteers and have been in kind of negative cash flow places over their lifetime. They've built up over a number of years, so they're strong now, but they will have relied on a huge amount of personal input to get them to that stage.
Do you feel it is, given that you do need a local champion to get the thing up and running? I mean, is it sustainable long term? Does that local champion need to be involved with the project in years to come, or can he then step back and say it's now in place, we can let it run?
I think in the case of those projects, and there's also a similar one in Lochiel, because they're starting to generate enough revenue to pay staff, they become more sustainable and they're training up so that there's more and more people around. But that is quite a long and difficult journey, I think, to be fair, and those people have to be commended for the efforts they've put into getting that far. So can it be part of the solution? I think it can, but it is a pretty unique and challenging way to deliver the solution. And I think we do need to take care of the sustainability of those in the long term. So that will only really be something that's evident after they've been operating for, say, 10 years and seeing how those dynamics change. There's also potential that other competitors could come in and squeeze the marketplace that these community projects have got at the moment. And that would be pretty damaging for them if they were unable to compete with that in terms of price or service. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but it remains difficult.
But I mean, you could.
Sorry, can I just? I'm conscious of the time,
Yeah,
and what I would like to try and drag you back to is the final question that you indicated you might like to ask.
Yeah. And it is the Scottish Government will be considering the future of Community Broadband Scotland in reaching the 100%. And what action would you and the panel like to see regarding the provision of community broadband provision in the future?
Scotland's had the most enormous challenges in order to get some of its newer projects moving. They're not of our making. They're things like state aid decision being changed and procurement regulations being changed. So I'd like to see a good shot at getting some new projects delivered and at extending the models that I've just described. And I think that will give us a bit more information about the extent to which those kind of projects can be part of the longer term solution. So I think it's a testing time in that we need to get some more things done to be able to show the role that these could take. But I wouldn't want to impose that solution on any community. I think it's something that you need to want to be involved with and feel quite strongly about. I don't think it should be your only choice in terms of the way to get broadband.
Can I ask, as a supplementary to that, is your budget, and obviously the last 5%, which Peter was indicating, is what you want from your budget from between now and 2021 to make sure that you play the valuable role that you are playing to deliver to the very last houses?
The budget that we have is sufficient to connect, I think, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 premises. So I think there's a huge question coming on the back of the open market review, which is going to start imminently, as to which communities want to get involved in that type of solution and what is the scale of the problem yet to be addressed. So our budget will take us to 10,000 roughly. Beyond that, CBS doesn't have a budget to take it further.
So are you suggesting it's double or treble or quadruple what it should be? What do you perceive the need is going to be? I mean, you must have had some idea of what you're going to be asked to do.
I think because R100 is still a little bit ambiguous, I'm sorry this is not answering your question very, very well.
to get your plea across so we can understand it.
We could do a lot more, you're right, and we could extend a lot further, and I think it would be good value for money to reach that target and to get people involved. My view is that empowerment is a really strong part of what Scotland's good at doing and is a really strong part of increasing demand for broadband. So we could, we could spend an awful lot more, tens of millions more, if people wanted to take that approach. We're doing a bit of work at the moment to assess the interest in that from the communities that are already expressing interest in what we're offering, just to check in with them. What's giving me the caveat is that some communities have expressed an interest in just having broadband done to them rather than getting hands-on, and we need to offer those communities that choice through the R100 wider programme, and it's just helping them understand those distinctions and their level of involvement that they might want to take, I think would help set the budget.
Okay, Peter, you happy?
With that, yep.
Rhoda, yeah.
Small supplementary. Given that the promise is 100%, and Community Broadband Scotland is going to have to be involved in delivering that 100% because most of what's left is the hard-to-reach areas, where would you see your budget going to be on track to deliver that with technologies that are sustainable into the future?
Do you mean in terms of geographic locations or technology types or?
Both.
Both. In terms of geographic locations, I think we feel our target customer base is the most remote and rural, so places that are really quite small and far-flung, living in what I would call the nicest parts of Scotland. But again, kind of dispersed or geographically kind of stretched out communities. And I would like to see the other parts of R100 extending fibre out to make those viable projects. I think that's a really important thing. I do think the technologies are likely to be mainly wireless, but we're working on encouraging communities to get involved in sort of self-dig for fibre, because I think that would be a really more future-proofed way of tackling some of the issues. So again, that depends on community resources and willingness to literally get your hands dirty. But we're just adapting the package of support we offer to give people more choices in how they engage with that, and helping them understand the difference between getting involved in something like a fibre self-dig versus connecting wireless projects, which can be pretty easy to do, to be honest, in terms of the skills and equipment that people would work with. So I think it's about giving people a bit more of a choice in how they choose to get involved in it, and giving them flexibility in and understanding in how they make that choice. But for me, the customer base for CBS will always be the most remote areas.
Sorry.
Can't put a figure on.
I can't until I think we know more about the results from the open market review and which premises need to be connected and where they are. I think that would be much easier. I mean, no, I don't think I can guess. Sorry.
Can I just say that as things develop, what would be very helpful for you to keep this committee informed, so that we know where we're going, because it's an ongoing issue for everyone. So if you could keep us informed on that. Now, Michael, you want to come in? I'm going to let you come in very briefly, if I may.
The scale of the problem is more like 200,000 premises rather than 10,000 premises. I think Community Broadband Scotland's done a fantastic job, but Zoe's pointed out some of the issues of scaling it up. So one is the know-how, and actually funding some training. There's now, I think, enough activity that it really is possible to build on what you already have and for people to learn. You can see, if you look at the map, that this stuff is infectious in the sense where it's happened, nearby it starts happening. And we need to find ways of making that happen on a bigger scale. And I think funding for that would be well spent.
One thing worth mentioning is the cross-party group on digital participation has just been reconstituted. Ofcom acts as the secretariat to that. Its first meeting since the May elections is this evening. And I mean, there are two strands to the work. There's the big infrastructure questions that we've addressed, and then the second is the kind of skills piece and training piece. And although we don't have, as a regulator, a kind of a direct role in that, we're very happy to use that group to explore some of the issues that Michael Foreman and Zoe have just mentioned.
There, if I may, Jamie, you've got some questions which I think are going to be in the direction of Stuart McKinnon. So.
Skip question 16, or yeah.
Yes, I've skipped my question on the fact that there is shortness of time, and I was going to ask the panel members if they'd like to give a written response to it afterwards.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm actually going to shrink it down because, for the benefit of time, but also because I'd like to bring up another point about budget specifically. So I have one question for Stuart McKinnon. What work has been done at the FSB in terms of what if we don't do this? What if we get this wrong? What is the negative effect to the Scottish economy if we don't get this digital question right within the term of this Parliament? Because I think it'd be really helpful to know when we look at how much we have to spend. We're just looking at a cost to the purse. We're not looking at the upside of it or the ROI on that spend, and it's actually more helpful to be able to make a spending decision if you know what the negative outcome is if you don't make that spend. So I wondered if you had any views on that.
I don't have a number to say it would cost this much if we don't do it. But what we know is that 3/4 of businesses say that digital is important or essential to their future growth plans. So for 3 in every 4 businesses, they say our plans for growth involve digital technologies, and if they don't have good infrastructure, then they can't go down those growth plans. In addition, other work that we did suggests that across a wide range of industries, about 4 in 10 of the largest businesses are going to be replaced by new business models powered by digital technologies. So the disruption that we've seen in retail, for example, with the rise of e-commerce, is very likely to happen to other industries that we can't even think about at the moment. And if those businesses of the future are going to be Scottish, then Scotland has to have the infrastructure to be able to cope with those industries.
Appreciate the very succinct answer. I wonder if I may just raise a point about budget in general, because I think it's actually very relevant to what we're trying to achieve.
Just before we do that, I wondered if anyone else felt they had I mean, Stuart Robertson might have an answer on how much it might cost in the Highlands not to deliver this.
No, sorry, I don't have an answer on that, but I would echo the points. I think digital, it's essential everywhere, and it's not just about the economy, it's about the way people live, and I don't think there's any disagreement that digital has to be 100%.
But can I, the one thing that hasn't come up, and the one question that I haven't been able to ask, which was on skill shortages and delivery of it, I'm assuming all the panel accept it's not just about business, it's about educating our children and giving them the ability to compete on a worldwide basis by having access to information on the web. I'm taking that as a given, but Zoe, do you want to come in on
not a particularly lengthy answer, but I totally agree that digital connectivity would enhance personal skills for young people and adults learning. Lots of people come back and feedback to us that they want to do online courses, and increasingly schools are trying to do that with some of their more remote pupils. So I think it's a hugely important part of it. And just on the back of the previous question, we did a little bit of work, which I can send as a written evidence for you, on the benefits of broadband. It doesn't answer your question about what would we lose out, but it does say something about the economic GVA that would come from increased connectivity. So I'll send that in. Sorry, my voice is going now. Apologies.
Jamie, if you want a quick follow-up,
that'd be very welcome. And for the record, I probably should have said that in terms of interest, I'm a member of the cross-party group on digital participation. I commend the work that they do. If any other committee members are interested in that area, it's a fascinating group to be a member of, or at least to follow their proceedings. They're doing some great work in looking to the negative social economic effects of not being included in the in Digital Scotland. I think I have a more general, very quick question on how we're going to formulate the scrutiny of the budget on this, because it seems to be a very complex funding mechanisms in different parts of the country. We know there's already been money spent on the 95%. We know there's a tender process coming up for next year that we will have to make recommendations on how we get to that last difficult 130,000 premises. We know there's some spending commitments made last week from the UK government, from the autumn statement, around 740 million for digital infrastructure. So I guess, given that Ofcom are already involved in working with the UK government a lot and advising them both technically and economically on how they can achieve their targets, how is that going to follow through to the devolved administrations, and how are we going to make sure that there's a proper joined-up discussion between money that's been committed from Westminster and money that's been committed in the budget that we're going to scrutinise here?
I'm going to limit that question to Glenn, if I may.
Okay.
It's just on a timing basis. If anyone else feels that they particularly want to add something later, please write to us on that particular thing. But I'm going to limit that to Glenn, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we absolutely recognise the many different schemes that both have existed and the commitments that the different administrations have made, and the fact that it'll be essential that the two governments have a dialogue in particular. So I think if thinking about your scrutiny session with the Cabinet Secretary in December, one of the things that we in Ofcom are quite keen to see is that kind of direct engagement between the two administrations to discuss how all of this stuff fits together, and certainly from our point of view, what it means for us in terms of how we exercise our regulatory functions. commitments, because there are considerable differences in a broadband USO, for example, that is about a safety net or floor, and the commitments to superfast, 100% superfast by 2021. And we're very keen that the administrations have a conversation and a dialogue, which we would like to be involved in, which I'm sure a number of the other partners represented here and elsewhere would like to be involved in too, so that we have a clear sense of when they want to do things and how much they think it's going to cost.
Perfect. The last question is from John. And
I've been told to be very quick, so I'll run through it. I mean, it's in the whole area, really, of inequalities, digital participation, maybe touching on public services, because poorer people tend to use public services a bit more. I mean, some figures we read are quite positive. Home internet access has increased from 42% in 2003 to 80% in 2014. That's very good. But then, slightly more negative, 98% of households with incomes over 40,000 have home internet access, but only 60% of households with incomes under 15,000. And I mean, we're given figures too that 38% of adults reported they had used a local authority website for any purpose. Only 18% had used a government website. I mean, I saw the film recently, I, Daniel Blake. I don't know if you've seen that. The guy there who's unemployed doesn't know what to do with the mouse on the computer. So my question is, what can we do about all of that? Is it the schools, or do we just try and get people a higher income and it's nothing to do with our actual digital side of things? Or should we put money specifically into this?
it's a huge question.
Sorry.
And I am literally going to work from my right, army right, i.e. Michael, if I may, and go along the panel. Michael.
So, as I said at the beginning, as we get more people online, those who are left behind are increasingly, in Scotland, increasingly in the bottom SIMD quintile, or whatever you want to look at. The further down you go, the more likely you are to be offline. If you're offline, you're likely to be suffering deprivation in other ways. I think it's essential that we focus on those areas. Some of them are rural, many of them are in our cities, and a large number of them are in Glasgow. One can pinpoint with the Ofcom data where people are online, where they're not online, and how that links to SIMD, and it's stark. Things are getting much better, but there's a hard core of deprivation that we're not hitting hard enough at the moment.
Glenn, do you want to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's a combination of the issues that you mentioned. There's quite a fundamental question for Ofcom as a regulator, and traditionally a kind of economic regulator that's focused really on driving competition in the market, and whether or not the functions and powers that we have allow us to address some of the sorts of issues that you've described. So this was an issue that came up last week in the Westminster Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, where our chair and chief exec were asked, "Do you need more powers, for these sorts of issues?" We don't have a direct answer to it yet. I think some of the stuff that's coming with the UK Digital Economy Bill is helpful for us to be able to drive change, but it is something that we're quite keen to keep an eye on. And if we feel that we need more power to address some of the challenges that you've suggested, then we won't be shy in asking for it.
Zoe.
I think it's really important that we do something to address that level of inequality. And it may not be about home connectivity, it may be about using public services like schools and libraries, and helping people engage with digital technologies. So I would say, in answer to your question, I think we should spend more time and put a bit more effort into that area of work.
Presumably more money.
Unfortunately, always.
Stuart.
I would just agree with what's been said already, and I think digital participation does need continued funding. I think that as far as Highlands and Islands Enterprise are concerned, I think that our biggest area of focus would be the connectivity side, to make sure that people have access to the services. But there will be other organisations that will need to look at the digital participation issue.
So can I just be clear? It would not be, you would not be worried if a poorer person in a village did not have access, but all the richer people in the village did have access?
No, that's not what I meant at all. What I mean is that it's, different agencies will do different parts of the jigsaw. It's absolutely important that everybody can get access. And I think to cover that situation, I think it would be perhaps a better use of as Zoe said, libraries and public buildings to enable Wi-Fi access, for example.
So can I just one of the issue is certainly around the Highlands where it's more difficult. Nearly all the Highland Council buildings and the libraries have access to broadband. And I know from personal experience of visiting them to do constituency surgeries, there is no public access to computers there. Would that be something that you would want to promote?
We would certainly be behind the continued focus on digital participation. The only point I was trying to make was that I didn't see it as one of HIE's core activities. We have other parts of the jigsaw that we have to focus on. And what I was meaning was that getting the services out into the most rural parts was probably our primary responsibility, as opposed to looking at Wi-Fi access.
Stuart.
I think digital participation is a huge issue. I would highly recommend the work the Carnegie Trust has done looking at this particular issue. I think we're maybe one of the things that seems to be really improving digital participation is the mobile phone, and having more public services available, mobile-friendly public services, digital government public services would be a good way to go. Better digital public services generally would allow you to have more money to focus on those most in need. And I think that would be again, that comes back to what's the cost of not doing something about this. Just to touch on digital skills, generally, there's been work by Skills Development Scotland looking at the digital skills of the technology industry, but I think there's a wider bit of work required to look at the digital skills that the wider workforce will require now and in the future in terms of digital skills, which could be expanded to look at the digital skills that we expect of Scottish citizens.
Okay, that which leads neatly, if I may, onto the one question that wasn't asked, which was on what the government needs to do to invest on making up the skills shortage, certainly at school level and during the education process. And if you were able, post this meeting, to say where we think the government is on that and where they need to go on that, we would certainly welcome your responses on that in the written format. Because of the time, I haven't been able to ask it. Is there anything that any one of you would like to say that you think we should have asked you and you want to give a specific point on, or are you happy? I mean, Stuart is starting army left, you're right.
Yes, just briefly touching on the skills point, money coming to Scotland from the apprenticeship levy, wouldn't it be great to use that as a focus, improving the country's digital skills with this money coming to Scotland? From memory, approximately 200 million coming to Scotland. Let's pump it into digital skills. I think generally speaking, in terms of the budget, what we're trying to get, what we would encourage the government to do is publish a list of the works they expect to be done every year, so that businesses can make decisions on the basis of firm information about their infrastructure. Too many businesses simply don't know when their infrastructure is going to be improved. I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Stuart.
No, I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Zoe.
The only thing I would add is to look beyond the 2020 target and to consider the budget over a longer period to get all the way to where we need to go.
Okay, Glenn.
Yes, just one ask, if I may. Ofcom published its draft annual plan yesterday, which we do annually for consultation, and that crosses our range of strategic priorities. And in line with the Smith Commission and Scotland Act provisions, we are consulting this committee, other Scottish Parliament committees and the Scottish Government, and we would be very pleased if you could formally come back to that.
We'll certainly be looking at that. Michael.
Thank you very much. I think I've had a chance to say quite a lot of what I wanted to say. On skills, I think we have, SCVO is doing a fantastic job addressing some of the skills gap in some of the most deprived areas of Scotland. That's one thing that's happening. But I think we have to look to the future, and our education system is not yet digitally connected. We teach subjects without teaching how you use digital in those subjects. I'm not talking about teaching computer science now. I'm talking about how we teach every subject so that when people go into the workforce, they know how digital can affect what they're doing in whatever they're doing. So I think that's something that we should focus on from the teacher training colleges all the way through to the primary schools.
Thank you. I think that concludes our session. I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the committee to come in. It's a huge subject and obviously of huge importance to Scotland and the budget that's going to be considered when it's published in December. I would think on behalf of the committee, Glenn, we're looking for some extra additional information from you, and Zoe, we're looking for information from you. But I would ask all of the witnesses, if stuff you feel is important comes to your attention, that the committee would welcome any input that you would have. And I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd now like to suspend the meeting while we reorganise for the next witness. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. At agenda item 3, the committee is going to take evidence on the draft Harbour Revision Order, Aberdeen Harbour Revision Order 2016. I welcome Hamza Youssef, Minister of Transport in the Islands, Chris Wilcock, there you are, Head of Ports and Harbours, and Magdalene Boyd, who is a solicitor from the Scottish Government. The instrument is laid under an affirmative procedure, which means that the Parliament must approve it before the provisions can come into force. Following this evidence session, the committee will be invited at the next agenda item to consider a motion to approve the instrument. Can I invite the Minister to make a short opening statement?
Good morning, Convener. Thank you, Convener. The expansion of Aberdeen Harbour is a nationally significant project, as indicated by its inclusion in the third National Planning Framework. It will benefit the economy of both the North East and indeed of Scotland as a whole, as the support for the oil and gas industry moves into a new phase in the North Sea. It will allow the harbour to expand out of its city centre constraints, provide state-of-the-art facilities to current and new market customers. Aberdeen Harbour Board plans to invest around £400 million in the project. Our environmental advisors have considered the proposal in detail and concluded that with mitigation in place, there will not be a significant effect on the environment. I will approve, of course, the construction environmental management documents, which will ensure that mitigation prior to any work commencing. I'm aware that some local objections remain, but I'm satisfied that the harbour are working with Aberdeen City Council to improve local amenities to compensate for any loss of green space in Nig Bay in their mitigation plan. The recently signed Aberdeen City deal will also support infrastructure improvements around the new harbour, although the full cost of the harbour construction will be met by the Harbour Board. I commend the draft order to you, Convener, and of course now ready to take any questions you or other members may have.
Thank you very much. I think the first question is from John.
Good morning, Minister. Minister, my understanding is that there's planning permissions being granted for the landward side works, and this revision order is for the seaward part, to put it that way in layman's terms. Is that correct?
There's some work that is commencing in and around, but the main work that has to be conducted cannot commence, as you say, within the sea until I give approval as the Minister to the construction and environmental management documents. That would be correct.
And what's your view on the level of scrutiny that's afforded this compared to the other works?
Well, I think the level of scrutiny in terms of the work that is going to be taking place in the sea is great, actually. You know, the main objections that came from bodies like SNH, even from the Council themselves, SEPA, other environmental organisations, and indeed individual objectors were in and around the environmental impacts. And they were towards a number of species, from salmon to bottlenose dolphins and many in between. And therefore, the level of mitigation, the level of work, the level of scrutiny that is going into that piece of work, I think is vast, but it's important to be done to give the necessary reassurances.
Indeed, you mentioned these organisations. If I can talk about a letter that RSPB sent, and it included Marine Scotland and Transport Scotland, within your particular remit, and it covered species eider ducks, tern, kittiwakes, as you said, the cetaceans, or dolphins as you and I would call them, and also the habitat creation and management plan. Now, the environmental statement, it seems to me that this has worked quite well. Would you confirm that there has been good engagement between the...
Yes, I think the engagement has been very positive, and that you're right, the organisations that you mentioned, many of them, including the RSPB, initially put in objections. Colleagues in the government then worked closely with those organisations to ensure and to give the necessary reassurances that any mitigation that was put in place would lessen the environmental impact. Those objections were then withdrawn after those reassurances. Now the real test, of course, will be the detail in the construction and environmental management documents. If the member was to go to Article 29, I think it is Schedule 2, Part D of the draft order, to make sure I'm not giving you the wrong schedule, that you know, there's a number of plans, specific plans that are required, 13 of them in total, from marine mammal protection you know, otter protection plans, to fish species protection plan, habitat management plans. So, you know, a lot of detail going in to give reassurances, I hope, to organisations like the RSPB and SNH.
Well, if I may, clearly it has, because on the basis of these reassurances about mitigation, RSPB, for instance, withdrew their...
Yeah.
So, as a general principle, would you commend this approach to major developments?
Yes, I think it's certainly one that, in fact, one that, yes, I would commend to answer your question. I think it's fair to say we've also learnt from previous examples and previous infrastructure projects that have taken place where perhaps the level of engagement wasn't as thorough as this level of engagement has been. So we're always learning, and I think there's a good model there. It's not to say that everything has been ticked off. As I say, there's still some documents that I'm waiting for to see before that work can absolutely be signed off. But most certainly, I think it's been a good level of engagement that should be replicated.
Okay, finally, Minister, if I may, you talked about the benefit to the economy and specifically mentioned oil and gas. Can you comment, and I appreciate it might be out with your remit, but can you comment on the potential that this would have for securing jobs in the renewable sector and also decommissioning, which is going to be increasingly important?
Yes, I mean, again, you're absolutely right. It would be a decision and a conversation that AHB, the Harbour Board, would more extensively have. But certainly there's potential. You know, everybody here is aware, members are aware of the difficulties and the challenges facing the North Sea oil and gas sector. I think AHB are looking to diversify, so decommissioning most certainly is part of their plans and part of the discussion, or servicing decommissioning, I should say. Certainly looking at other business opportunities like cruise vessels as well, which is important. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be looking towards renewables. I'm sure that will be part of the plan. I couldn't comment directly and say it absolutely is, but I'm certain any opportunities that diversify, while oil and gas will continue to be important, but diversify the opportunity, I think they will be looking at and looking at very closely.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's essentially a process point that I think it would be useful to get the Minister's response on the record. In the event that Parliament agrees this particular order, I take it the Minister can confirm that various parts of government and officials will continue to have oversight of the project as it goes forward. Things like, for example, there are time constraints on certain operations. And the Minister, in his contribution so far, has talked about documents that are still being waiting for that will need to be signed off. So it would just be helpful to know that this is not the end of the process as far as government's concerned. There will continue to be oversight, and in extremis, the plug could subsequently be pulled on this, although I'm absolutely 99.9% certain we won't reach that particular point.
Yes, and I think that's an important point to make, particularly when there are so many environmental factors that have been considered, that have been questioned, that have been asked. That yes, on a project of this size and scale, although it is being funded by Aberdeen Harbour Board, it's not being government funded, and we know there are trust port that reinvest back any profits that are made into the harbours. Although that's being said, the continual engagement, the oversight that is that has been mentioned in terms of the environmental documentation, yes, that will continue and should continue. But I should say from the offset, the relationship has been very good and very positive, and the engagement has been very good and very positive. And going back to John Finney's point, I think there's a good model there for others to look at for future projects as well.
Minister, could I just ask, I was looking through the papers, there were 21 local residents that were still objecting to this. Could you give me a flavour of what those on what grounds those objections were? Because you seem to have solved, I think it's 7 of the 28 objections, but 21 remain.
Yes, Convener, a lot of the objections did actually overlap and do still overlap with the environmental concerns. Now, as I've already mentioned, they're similar to the environmental concerns that were raised by organisations like SNH or RSPB. So I'm satisfied that the order should be laid, you know, because of the mitigation and the reassurances we've provided around environment. The other very strong theme that came from the objectors and remains from the objectors is the loss of the amenity, so the green space at Nig Bay. I know AHB and Aberdeen City Council are having discussions about how other local amenities can be improved. So St Fittick's Park, which is nearby, how can improvements perhaps be made? Now, that's separate to any conversation government is involved in. I should say that's a separate discussion that will be taking place and is taking place between AHB and the local council. So those were the two main themes, the loss of the amenity in the green space, but also the environmental impacts. And I think we've gone as far as we possibly can to give those reassurances. I think given very strong reassurances on that, and that's why I hope that the order will continue.
Peter,
be moved.
Thanks, Convener, and welcome, Minister. I just wondered. Environmental objections, there's been a number. I just want to be sure that SNH, which is a very important body, they are now content that all the issues that they had identified have now been addressed, and they are content that to carry on with this project.
Yes, I would surmise by the fact that they objected and then withdrew their objection. And that's generally the process that we go through. The number of objections will come to a number of various infrastructure projects. What we then try to do is have that discussion with those organisations and learn from them. Look, what can we do to help to give you the reassurances you need? So, for example, when it comes to one of the main environmental issues, it was around the bottlenose dolphins. And so the suggestion, well, what will happen now as a result of the mitigation and the reassurances that we're giving, there'll be a rock armour placed there. So any blasting work will be done behind that armour of rock, therefore mitigating the sound or the environmental impacts. Now, that comes from conversations with the likes of SNH. So in particular, to your question, yes, I would surmise that they're satisfied by the fact that they've withdrawn their objection. But we'll also wait to see what is in the construction environmental management documents, and that'll hopefully give even further reassurances to organisations like SNH.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank the Minister and his officials, although they were there contributing, but didn't say anything in supporting the Minister, and for the evidence they've given. I'd like to move on to agenda item 4, which is the consideration of motion 02398, calling for the committee to recommend the approval of the draft Aberdeen Harbour Revision Order 2016. I would invite the Minister to speak or just move the motion.
To move the motion and the order in my name.
Do members have any further comments or questions? The question, therefore, is that motion 02398 in the name of Humza Yousaf be approved. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
That is agreed. That concludes consideration of this affirmative instrument, and we will report the outcome of our consideration to the Parliament. I'd like to thank the Minister and his officials for giving evidence. That concludes this public part of the meeting today, and I'll now suspend the meeting to allow the committee to move into private session. Thank you, Minister.